Mm-mm.
Hey! Yep. Mhm. Here we go. The cat strangler. There she is. Woo!
Okay, I almost saw that dance. Nobody else did, unfortunately. Maybe at some point of time, we'll have this starting with you dancing on the screen. Good morning, Timothy.
Good morning, Maya. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. I hope that you're good. I can see that you're at yet another place today and reporting from there. You're going to tell us about this a little bit later. But before that, good morning to everybody listening to us, watching us on YouTube, LinkedIn, Clubhouse, and Facebook. It's a pleasure to have you with us on this Sunday morning, 8:20. It's early, I understand that, and I appreciate you being here even more. Well, it is the 184th episode of Japanese Politics One on One, and it is our pleasure to be with you and deliver these episodes. So, Timothy, I'll just turn it over to you so that we don't keep anybody waiting before we do the thank you plug for our sponsors. Let us know what we're going to hear from you today.
Great. Thank you very much, Maya, and good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for tuning in on Sunday mornings. This is the 184th episode. Today is August 18th, 2024. And what a week it has been, Maya. Incredible movement politically, but also the Olympic team returned. Mr. Kishida decided he was not going to run. It's not like he resigned, it's just he decided he wasn't going to repeat himself in a runoff election. Typhoon hit us 2 days ago, or yes, yeah, 2 days ago on Friday,
Oh, yeah.
basically shut down the entire city of Tokyo. But it was a big nothing burger. Not a whole lot happened. It wasn't a lot of damage that was um, pre- predicted. There was an earthquake almost 10 days ago, a 7.1 on the Japanese scale. It didn't cause a whole lot of damage, but it sure sent shockwaves throughout the meteorological agency, and they issued for the first time a nationwide warning. Actually, an advisory. The warning is higher up on the level. It lasted for 10 days, and that was withdrawn on Thursday. Um, and like I said, the uh, Obon, we are in the middle of Obon just this last week. This last weekend, the last time we met, it was a 3-day weekend, so I was also on the water, you might recall. I'm actually broadcasting today from Yume no Shima, which is a large marina in, I guess, downtown Tokyo. You can see there's a lot of congestion behind me, a lot of boats that are moored here. Strangely enough, there aren't many people here. You would have expected, summertime and Obon Yasumi and people coming in from out of town, that sort of thing. But the fact, not so much the typhoon, but the fact that there was an advisory that the Nankai Trough potentially holds, something of a bigger earthquake for us, really has scared people away from the shorelines, and I think has hit the economy pretty hard. There's plenty more to talk about. I want to get into that in a little bit more detail, but I just wanted to give you a heads up on what kinds of things we're going to be talking about today. Maya, I turn it back over to you so that you can give our sponsors an excellent plug. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, our thanks go to. Uh, yes. Well, our thanks go to Kanchu.com, and we're very happy to be sponsored by them. Thank you very much, James Howell, for being supporting us for quite a while now. It is a pleasure to introduce your services, bilingual services in English and Japanese, to the foreign community here in Japan, and also the Japanese speaking community, because we have a lot of Japanese viewers as well. So Kanacho.com and James Howell offer bilingual services in the field of buying and selling real estate in Tokyo and Yokohama, also rentals in Yokohama. So if you are not so confident in your Japanese language skills, please contact James, and you have your needs met in English. You have a great person talking with you and seeing how they can actually help you with the need you have. Thanks a lot, Timothy. Once again, it is back to you.
Thank you very much, Maya. So, as I was saying, it's been a very impactful week. This also was the week where we had the 79th anniversary of the end of the war. And this has been a very tough week in terms of memorials. So, as you might recall, 79 years ago, um, and you know, since I grew up on Okinawa, it's very close to me. I've been growing up with this sort of thing all my life. Okinawa fell on June 22nd, less than 2 months ago, and they planned to use Okinawa as a staging ground for the invasion of Japan proper. And in the meantime, they had bombing runs. It's actually come out over the last couple of weeks. There were two news stories that came out about bombing runs that was done by the American Air Force, where they dropped these bombs that were highly packed with explosives, but they looked like Fat Boy and they looked like Little Boy. They were the same shape, the same size, and they had maybe 80 or 90 practice runs. We didn't know this story widely, and they had these practice runs for 2 months leading up to the final bombing. And the other story that came out was these balloons that were floated from Japan that had incendiary devices, and they were floated across the Pacific to land in different forests or hopefully in towns throughout the United States to cause a disruption there. So there was a couple of stories that came out there. But getting back to the end of the war, let me see. On August 6th was the memorial for Hiroshima. It was the first hit. 2 days later, it was Nagasaki. And we reported last week that there was a little bit of controversy there because the Nagasaki mayor decided he was not going to invite Israel, the Israeli ambassador, to the memorial on August 9th. And that caused a big controversy. None of the G7 ambassadors visited Nagasaki in protest. They instead held their ceremonies here in Tokyo. And then on August 15th, 79 years ago, the Showa emperor went on the radio, and for most Japanese, it was the first time for them to actually hear his voice. And he admitted that the war was not going altogether well for Japan and that he was going to stop hostilities. And look at what has happened since then. It's just a testament to I don't know, the mankind and to the goodwill of people to kind of put things behind them and go for peace and the peace constitution that Japan has now. Um, but as for Okinawa, it was 82 days, the largest number of soldiers on both sides that died. I think on the Japanese side, it was almost 90% of the soldiers died in that battle. And the United States suffered the largest number of deaths during a battle throughout the World War II. So 3.1 million deaths overall came to a close. And as a result of that, here we are today talking about Japanese politics and a cadre of Japanese Japan hands, and I'm so grateful for that, and I appreciate everybody joining us. This is something I'm not a historian, but these are the underpinnings of how the economy, how society, how politics moves, and it's critically important. And just I bring that up just for your attention. The yen was at 147 this week. It closed on Friday. This was a Obon. It was a 4-day week, but many people were taking off on Obon. Uh, the economy actually went up. The reports now on July have surfaced, and the economy took a little bit of a tick up, although it wasn't enough to actually encourage the prime minister, who announced on Wednesday that he was not going to go for a second term. The Obon vacation ended, 2 days ago, and so coming Monday, Japan is back to work, and now we on a roller coaster, actually blowing through to go to September, one of the busiest months of the year through the business community. September, October, November. They close out in December. A lot of nomikai and bonenkai. December, the back end of December is pretty much a wash. The first part of January, similarly. And then in January, sometime in mid to late January, the diet session will open. That's a constitutionally mandated term, 150 days, that the diet will get together. Between now and then, I don't know. I guess I can say turmoil awaits us, or we actually are in turmoil. And I want to talk about what's going on politically. But there are other things. Let me just touch on them before we get into the real meat of that. The Olympic team returned victoriously from Paris this week. Many, maybe 90, 91 of Japan's athletes stayed for the closing ceremony. And Japan did particularly well in this Olympics. Let me see, there were 20 gold um, medals that were awarded to Japan and 45 overall. The United States took the largest number of medals, but they tied with China in the gold medals. So the United States got 40 gold, China got 40 gold. Coming in at number 3 was Japan, almost half of that, 20 gold. But overall, the United States got 126 medals, China got 91, and Japan got 45. And let me just go through the numbers because they are somewhat significant. You know, Japan hosted the Olympics last year, and so they did particularly well as the host city, and as you would expect. But the number of medals that they garnered is the highest since the 1968 games overseas. So they did particularly well last year, but the 1968 games were particularly good in Mexico for Japan. There were 10,714 athletes overall, and 403 came from Japan. They participated in 43 events, and I'm sure everybody's watched that, what they did with breakdancing, fencing, judo, gymnastics, just superlative. And they came back to a hero's welcome on Tuesday, some of them on Wednesday, to get the news from Mr. Kishida that he would decide that he was not going to run. The typhoon that hit us on the 16th, which was a Friday, was predicted to be particularly severe. It was a direct hit towards Chiba. It was going to hit where it hit maybe 6 years ago, and created a huge devastation. And I think they maybe overplayed that a little bit because everybody was terrified. The whole city was shut down, even though going into the office, as I did on Friday, the streets were vacant. Nobody was out walking, but it wasn't really a huge storm. So that sometimes happens. And similarly, they don't predict it, and the wind and the weather and the rain just falls out of the sky. Sometimes it takes you by surprise. And like I said, the earthquake on the 9th, maybe 2 weeks ago, on a Friday, created a huge panic throughout Tokyo. All of the telephones mentioned an alert, and I think the alert was not just in Tokyo; it was throughout the nation. Everybody's phones buzzed about, brace yourself. There's an earthquake coming, and that was almost 10 days ago, and since then they've had 23 quakes in that region. But throughout the archipelago, even up as far as where the earthquake was in Fukushima, they've had significant tectonic movement. And there's been probably 70 or so earthquakes that have happened since then. So they've removed the alert. So we are not on high status standby. But the Japanese government has told people just still be aware of your surroundings, and watch the news and listen to your phone and be prepared. So that's also kind of scary to hear from the central government. The shock of the Bank of Japan creating turmoil in the markets. We're now 2 weeks away from that. The market suffered its hugest loss on Friday, and then on Monday, and then it benefited from its greatest increase, probably a 12% increase on Tuesday. And by Friday a week ago, the markets had calmed down. So this last week, once again, it was a 4-day work week. Many people were off, so the markets were relatively calm. But I think this next week coming in, you're going to see a lot of volatility. The yen is doing much better now, 147. Japan does particularly well when it's in that range. When it hits 150, 160, there's market turmoil. But in any event, the Bank of Japan has announced that they're not going to have another rate increase this year. They haven't officially announced that. One of the officials, top officials, has said it doesn't look like it's going to happen, but you just never know. We are in such a volatile time right now. The prime minister's election, on the 20th, the election committee for the LDP will have their second meeting, and they will set the time and the duration of the candidates or for the election. We predict that it's going to be on the 20th of September. That seems to be the most prime time for them to have that election, probably a 10-day campaign. And so starting on Monday, starting on actually when the prime minister decided he was not going to run again, he actually in a cabinet meeting said, if you want to run for election, it's okay with me. Go ahead and start your campaign. And typically, you would not do that. If the prime minister is going to be running, it is unpolitic, it is bad faith for you to be a cabinet member and run against, your boss, the prime minister. He went forward and he said, listen, if you want to run, I'm not going to hold it against you. Please go at it because I'm not going to be running. So there's a lot going on politically there. Probably on Monday, you're going to see a lot of people begin to throw their hats in. Mr. Kobayashi, Takayuki Kobayashi from Chiba, a 4-term lower house member, 49 years old, kind of coming up somewhat suddenly, but very popularly, has already collected his 20 endorsements, and he will be the first to publicly announce. He has a press briefing scheduled for tomorrow, and I think in quick succession you're going to have several people that toss in their hats. Let me see what else is there. The other kind of complicating thing is, let's say we have a presidential election on the 20th. We have a new prime minister, guaranteed we're going to have a new prime minister on the 20th. He's going to form his cabinet, and his cabinet will consist of some of the people that he ran against because they're popular, they're vote getters. He needs to reward them with some ministerial portfolio, so he'll be distributing those. So the people whose names you hear now as contenders for the prime minister's race, they're not going away. They will continue to be involved in some form or fashion. It would be kind of insulting to the voters who voted for them if they weren't given some sort of a role in the government. And also it would incite them to be more angry with you. So the same thing that we saw when Mr. Suga was defeated by Mr. Kishida, it created a rift that exists today. So the other thing that happens is they'll have a new prime minister, a new cabinet. They will put together over a period of maybe 30 days, 35 days, an economic stimulus package so that people will fall in love with the new prime minister. They'll say, this is, we're going to give you cake and candies, and this is our new policy, and these are the priorities that I have to begin to boost up the popularity there, because they will be moving into an election period in the new year. Not right away, but in the new year they'll be doing that. And the prime minister who becomes prime minister is going to want to stay prime minister and exceed even Mr. Abe's term. So there's a lot to be said there. But even if they offer that and they make a economic stimulus package that people are in love with, we have the elections in the United States on November 5th for the presidency. And that can cause ripples throughout the Japanese economy with the yen, all sorts of things there. So even though a new cabinet, new policies, moving forward towards January, what's going on in the United States can have a terrific impact here. So I think the only thing I can really say is moving forward, and at least for the next 5 or 6 weeks, is really a lot of turmoil. This election for LDP president is going to bring a lot of people out of the woodwork. In the past, when the factions existed, it was the faction bosses who endorsed and supported and pretty much handpicked who the candidates would be. So in post-war history, you very rarely saw four candidates, and the LDP has been dominated previously by about six political factions, and now there's only one faction. But there are a couple of kingmakers. There's Mr. Aso, whose faction still exists. There's Mr. Suga, who has a bone to pick with Mr. Kishida and wants to get back in the game. So he has some favorites that he wants to endorse. And now you've got Mr. Kishida. And Mr. Kishida is not out. He wants to, in typical Japanese politics, as prime minister, you do have power. You're running the government. You're getting things done. You're doing favors for people. But you're under scrutiny. You're being watched very carefully. So even if your son has a Christmas party in the official residence of the prime minister where you might live, and you can have a party in the prime minister's residence, but even something as innocuous as that can cause a huge storm of controversy. Once you finish being prime minister, now it's time for you to reap the benefits of all of the things that you did and all the friends that you helped. So in some sense, you become a little bit more powerful as being a former prime minister. So don't cast Mr. Kishida out. He also has a bit of a bone to pick with Mr. Suga, but also with Mr. Aso, who he might say, the reason why I wasn't able to run, and there'll be lots of analysis going on in the coming days about why he did it and what his timing was. But he could have stuck to it if he had the endorsement of Mr. Aso. And Mr. Aso, I think he was sitting on the fence, weighing his options. He had a dinner on Wednesday night, just a couple of days ago, with Mr. Motegi, a 2-hour meeting. But this was following the Kishida announcement. So I don't think that precipitated it, but certainly without Mr. Aso's endorsement, I think Mr. Kishida just decided he couldn't handle a run for the election and the controversy that would cause, and then manage the government after that. So where it stands right now is we are looking towards a new cabinet. So all of the people that are in the cabinet now have to resign. Some of them might throw their hats in for prime minister. And there are a couple of really good candidates there for prime minister, even this time, but if not this time, in the next election. So you've got Ms. Kamikawa, who is the foreign minister. She's doing a great job. She's female. She's highly popular, very competent. And you've got Mr. Hayashi, who is the chief cabinet secretary, that has done a great job for Mr. Kishida. These two individuals belong to the Kishida faction, or what was left of the Kishida faction. And just to be clear, although the formal faction has not or has dissipated, they still are considered policy study groups. So the people are still bound to each other. They don't want the faction system or the benefits of the faction system to disappear because there's power in numbers. But the fact that they are in a faction generates too much controversy. And I think everybody understands, Mr. Kishida in particular, that the next election that they have the LDP will suffer as a consequence of this huge money scandal that we spent the last 5 months discussing, and probably is the core reason why the prime minister is not going to run. At the same time, and we've talked about this before, the Constitutional Democratic Party is going to have their election for leader. I think their election is on the 23rd. So the LDP is going to be on the 20th, and then the Constitutional Democratic Party is going to be on the 23rd, exactly what they did not want to happen. Komeito, which is the coalition partner for the LDP, is also having their election for leader, and I'm not sure, but I think maybe the current leader, who has been in office for 10 or 12 years, he might not resign his role because of the turmoil in the party right now, but he is scheduled to resign and give the leadership over to somebody younger and more vibrant than he is. He's actually probably not going to run in the next election. But with the Constitutional Democratic Party, the largest opposition party, Mr. Izumi has already received one contender, the former leader of the party, who will run against him. So that's announced. And finally, geopolitically, at least, the summit of June 2024, the G7 summit, it's interesting to note that of the G7 leaders, three of them have changed hands. Three of the countries in the G7, the United States, Great Britain, and Japan, have now their leaders in that just recent G7. So when you're talking about cohesion and consistency and predictability, it's not just Japan. It seems to be something that's going on, and what's going on in the EU too is also signaling great rifts and great shifts that are going on there. So there's a lot going on. Let's talk a little bit more specifically now, and I'd like to preserve as much time as I can for Q&A because there's a lot going on, and I can't cover everything. So I'll be guided by your questions and attempt to answer them. But as you all know, this is a briefing for Japan Hand. So there are other people who are much more astute. They're more deeply involved in some of these issues than I am. So, I rely on you to participate too. That's why the program is called One-on-One. We get to exchange our views and our concerns about some of the different issues and ask questions. No questions are bad because it's Japanese politics is somewhat difficult. Getting on to the election uncertainties, the political uncertainties. There's uncertainties about who the contenders are. As I said earlier, in the past, there's been at most four. There were four the last time when Mr. Kishida won. He had 2 rounds there. There were 4 contenders. They had a runoff. Then there were 2 contenders, Mr. Kono and Mr. Kishida. Kono did really well in the first round, but he was beat by Mr. Kishida in the second round. There'll be the same sort of situation in this new upcoming election, except it's going to be far more than 4. There could be 9 or 10 contenders. This is unheard of in Japanese post-war politics, or in politics in general here. So there are many contenders. The economy is up again. It's down again. It will have a defining role. Mr. Motegi and Mr. Taro Kono said a couple of words about the economy, about the yen, in the recent past, and they got lambasted by the Bank of Japan and by the finance ministry for talking out of turn. You're not supposed to do that. That's in our ballywick. So, mind your own business. You stick with the digital agency, and you stick with, running the LDP, Mr. Motegi. So you cannot escape talking about the yen and about the economy. So the people who are contenders, who have that kind of foresight and that kind of ability to talk on those issues, will rise greatly. Geopolitics is another tough issue. You've got a potential trilateral being pushed by the United States between Japan, the United States, and Korea. They talked about that at the Camp David with Mr. Biden, Mr. Kishida, and Mr. Yoon. And they said that before the year was out, they would do a trilateral. And if you think about the trilateral coming now, within the next couple of months before the year is out, you've got Japan with a new leader, the United States with a new leader, and Mr. Yoon, who is essentially a lame duck president until the new election for president there. The legislature has turned to a different party, so he doesn't have full force there. The other issue that's recently come up is the kidnapping issue. The Japanese government is a bit worried that people are not focused on the North Korean kidnapping and the people who are missing from being abducted, not just in Japan, but throughout Europe too. They've been conked on the head and taken to North Korea. So there are several. There is at least a dozen known certified cases, but they suspect there might be at least 2 dozen this has happened to, and potentially more. Sometimes people just disappear and they don't know one way or the other. Are they dead? Have they escaped? Have they gone underground? But there are quite a few people that are missing and suspected of having been kidnapped. So geopolitics in this region is also very delicate. The national elections, undoubtedly, the new prime minister will form his cabinet He will form a stimulus package, and then more likely than not, before the year is out, he will have an election for the lower house. He'll say, look, this is a stimulus package. It's no longer Kishida, it's me. I'd like your vote of confidence. With that, let's close down the House. Let's everybody in the lower house, the 700 and some odd members, they go up for election. And if you give me your endorsement, then the economy will take off and Japan will be back to business. Um, so what this spells out are just the risks that are currently apparent throughout the economy, throughout just the political spectrum too. We don't anticipate huge changes in policy because, as you know, um, it's like the iceberg. Uh, Japanese politics is the part that you can see, but the bureaucracy is the massive part of the government that's under the water. And policies don't change. You've got your specialists that are in various ministries that pretty much tell the minister, this is what you should say, this is how you should say it, this is the policy that we have. So there's unlikely to be a major change in policy no matter who the winner of the LDP presidential election is. But there will be a change in the emphasis and in the priority. And that's what we're going to look forward to when he names who his cabinet picks are. And then when he announces his economic stimulus package, which we anticipate probably October, November 5th is the United States election for president. So it's really a packed schedule, and it's very difficult to predict that. You just keep your eye on it. But in any event, risk analysis indicates that particularly equities will be hit hard in the next coming months because of the risks that are apparent there, and also the impact of the U.S. interest rates and July's numbers that come out on Wednesday, what the inflation rate is like in the United States and what the Fed is likely to do as a consequence of that. And it looks like there will be some movement there. Let me see what else I've got. The lower house elections and the elections for prime minister. Let me just take a second, if you don't mind, to describe to you what happens in the elections, because I think it'll come up in the questions. So there will be there could be 9 candidates that come up for election. Right now, I have Mr. Motegi, Ishiba, not in this hierarchical order, actually. Motegi, Ishiba, Kono, Takaichi, Kobayashi, let me see, Kato, um, and who else? Koizumi. Koizumi is a likely candidate as well. And there might be 1 or 2 others that come out. The great thing about being a candidate is your star rises. So you have to convince 20 people to endorse you. There are 377 or 78 members of the LDP. If you have 20 of them that give you an endorsement, that number it's hard to get the 20 endorsements as it is. But right now, without the faction system and the faction bosses or the former faction bosses actually telling their members, vote with your conscience. I'm not telling you how to vote. The faction is not telling you how to vote. Maybe there's a wink and a nudge, and it does go that way. But we've got many contenders for the prime minister, and whether you win or lose, it's great publicity for you. If for example, Ms. Takaichi had not run before under the endorsement of Mr. Abe, she might not be a cabinet minister right now, economic security minister, and she might not be a potential candidate for prime minister again. So anybody in this list, it's great publicity. You saw what happened with the governor of Tokyo and the 58 people who wanted to be governor. Most of them didn't have a stinking chance to become governor, but they got billboard space all throughout Tokyo, and that's great publicity for them. Some of them really had no political ambitions at all. They just wanted the publicity. Similarly, and probably more to the point, with the presidential election of the LDP, for you to be a politician and identified as a contender, Mr. Ishiba, this will be his 5th time running for prime minister. Some would say that's kind of bad, and other people would say, he's got gumption and he's committed to becoming prime minister. So it's kind of hard to say. But in any event, let's say the election committee, which meets on the 20th, which is Tuesday, excuse me, meets on Tuesday. It tells us how long, what is the duration going to be, and when is the specific date. Then what happens is everybody throws their hat into the ring. They get their 20 endorsements. They start campaigning. The campaign has already started, but officially it would start maybe 12 days before the election day. And it will be very contentious. People will be saying things against each other. They'll be talking about their policies. There might be a little bit of mudslinging, which is, we don't see that very often here, but this is a contentious fight. And on the date of the election, the members of the LDP gather at the LDP headquarters and they have a vote. They have the first round vote. And of all the contenders, everybody votes. All of the LDP members vote who they want to be prime minister. There's also a contingent of voters, which is the LDP members, the people who have joined the LDP. They're businessmen, they're academics, they're whatever. They're not members of the parliament. There are 370, maybe 67 LDP votes, and there's a similar number distributed among the 48 prefectures. So 48 prefectures have a similar number there, and those votes are calculated by how many LDP members are in each prefecture. So of the 48 prefectures, there are some prefectures that are leaning more towards one candidate than another candidate. Those LDP members will vote for their candidate, and it all happens inside the LDP at the headquarters, probably in the late afternoon. That's the first round. If of the contenders, there's somebody who receives 50% or more, then they become prime minister. When there's more than two contenders, getting 51% it's a hard deal. So usually fall into the second round. The second round is a little bit different. You still have 367 LDP members, but the 48 prefectures have one vote. So there's 367 LDP members and 48 votes. So that's why it's kind of lopsided. That explains why Mr. Kishida did particularly well when running against Mr. Kono. It also explains why Mr. Ishiba sat out in the last election. I think he just didn't feel like he had the numbers in the second round. The first round is evenly distributed between the LDP members and the members of the parliament. But the second round is heavily weighed towards LDP members. So if you have any bones to pick with your fellow Diet members, in the second round, you're going to be washed out. So there's a lot more that can be said about that technically. Let me see. I think that's, yeah. The other thing that I just want to mention is when the prime minister announced, he said there should be a generational change in the LDP. I've been working on the LDP. We cast out the factions, the faction system, the old bosses, these guys, like, he didn't say it, but like Mr. Aso, like Mr. Suga, these old guys, it's time for a generational change. That gives a tremendous boost to the younger guys, particularly Mr. Kobayashi, and maybe to the female vote as well. So there could be, I predict that there'll be at least one female member, and there could be two. Noda Seiko might also toss her hat in, but you might have somebody else. Who knows? The foreign minister could possibly throw her hat in too. And like I said, whether you think you're going to become prime minister or not, it's not the race now, it's the next race. The LDP will definitely suffer in the general election that comes up because people still remember the kickback scandal. It's the election after this one that's coming up where there might be a little bit more stability in Japanese politics. Maya, that's about it for now. I know I've gone a little bit long, but I'd like to open it up for questioning. Once again, everybody, thank you very much for being interested and connected to Japanese politics and participating and to following us every Sunday. Thank you very much. Thanks, Maya.
Thank you, Timothy. Well, before we continue with the questions and answers, I want to once again say thank you, this time to our other sponsor, and that is Houze Inc. Thank you very much, Houze Inc. and Hana Urushisawa Howell for allowing us to feel a little bit, okay, to feel supported and to be supported by you. So, to everybody who hasn't heard this yet, Houze Inc. offers bilingual services in custom home design, construction, and renovations, plus commercial building construction. They also offer their services in two languages, English and Japanese. So, if you are willing to talk with them either in Japanese or in English, please do contact Hana or Howell on LinkedIn. And also, you can find their contact details, Hana's contact details, also James at kanachu.com, in the description of the video on YouTube. So, thank you very much, Hana, Houze Inc., and James at kanachu.com. Now, we continue with the questions and answers. So, Timothy, we have accumulated quite a few of them, but I also invite everybody who is watching us or listening to us at this point of time to share their thoughts and comments. And also, if you come up with a question or two or three, even share them in written. So, unfortunately, Clubhouse does not allow us to communicate directly. So, for this reason, if you are in Clubhouse, please write your comment there.
Yeah.
I will read it out to Timothy. And before we start with the questions that are on LinkedIn and any other platform which we are on at the moment, Timothy, I have a couple of questions to you as well. So, well, my first question is basically about what happens after the election, the PM election here in Japan, and the perspective is we know that Japan needs to project stability, political stability in the region to its neighbors, and also stability to project stability to its allies who are not in the region. So, do you think that this idea and this understanding will have any impact on the endorsements kingmakers have?
Well, everything close to home makes so much more difference than things that are a couple of blocks away. So people are more concerned, the politicians who are voting for who the prime minister is going to be, they're really voting for their own interests, first of all. So they want to
Mhm,
continue to be in the diet. They want to continue to be a member of the parliament because that allows them to potentially be a member of the cabinet, a minister of state, which further guarantees um, their likelihood of being succeeded in another election. So with the lower house is a little bit topsy turvy. The term of office, a 4-year term of office, can be cut at any time by the prime minister or by a vote of no confidence. The upper house, on the other hand, has a 6-year term and it's set. You can't disrupt the upper house. Every 3 years, half of the upper house goes for election. So if
mhm.
you're in the lower house is where the power is. The lower house passes the budget. The lower house essentially elects the prime minister within the LDP. So what you want is you want somebody that you can stand behind when the next election comes up and you've got your picture there and you've got the prime minister's picture in the background. You want it to be somebody that your constituency can get behind. So I think with that kind of calculus, a new fresh face carries a lot of weight. Somebody good looking, somebody like Mr. Kobayashi, even Koizumi carries that weight. A female candidate would also carry that. But in the final analysis, it's round two. Round two is going to be the deciding vote. You have the first round, you whittle that down to two contenders, and then of the two, you pick the prime minister. And as we've come to learn that it's not just about the contenders, um, even the contenders, there's no heir apparent for Mr. Kishida. He hasn't announced anybody. He's got a chief cabinet secretary who is in his faction, Mr. Hayashi. His foreign minister is also in his faction. Maybe it might be a little bit self-serving if he anointed them, and that might cause a bit of a rift. Um, but whoever becomes the prime minister, yes, it has an impact overall, and we certainly hope they're in the prime ministership long enough for people to actually remember their name or pronounce their name at least. It took Mr. Abe or Mr. Abe 2 or 3 years before he was able to achieve that even. Um, so yes,
Right.
it's mostly about what is in it for me and my constituency. I want them to vote for me again. And
Mhm.
secondly, it is more about the global, the geopolitical, but it's third or fourth in terms of contention, unless maybe you are Mr. Miss Kamikawa or maybe Mr. Hayashi, who have more of a global view. But I think everybody wants to be elected first and foremost.
Right. Okay. Thank you for that. And also, you mentioned that we have talked about this before, that now we have only one faction left, right? And all the others have disbanded. And, well, they have also released, what's that, the lease contracts for their headquarters and
Yes,
everything. Yes. But that was until Mr. Kishida was in power. So he was in office. My question to you is, do you think that there will be a comeback of the
a
faction?
resurgence. Yeah,
A
I
resurgence, yeah.
think a great question, and I think the likelihood of that happening is great because there's just so much utility. So, although Mr. Kishida said we're going to stop the factions, you guys stop factions, I'm going to stop factions. He was the first one. He said my faction. His
Mm-hmm.
faction has produced, you know, the largest number of prime ministers in post-war history, and he said I'm going to disband my faction. And it's like, who the hell told you? You're the leader of the faction, but what? Right? And then the other guys had to kind of follow suit. Mr. Nikai had to follow suit. He has a very powerful faction. He was the recipient. He received that mantle of authority from somebody that he admired, one of his bosses who received it from one of his. So it's kind of selfish and self-serving for somebody to be so arrogant in doing that. But the faction system has great power, coalescing the people and kind of policing them. This is how we're going to vote. This is important to us. This is our policy, our factional policy, even though it matches somewhat with the LDP. But this is the flag we're going to stand behind. So you better stick to it. And if you don't, you're disbanded from the faction, or we're not going to support you when your election comes up, or we're not going to give you as much money as you think you need. So it has a huge purpose that I think was just a little bit betrayed by the kickback scandal. So I think getting rid of the things that people don't like about the faction system and coming up with something that's a little bit more meaningful. So they don't call them factions anymore. They call them policy study groups. They still get together. At least when they had the faction, they had the office. They had a big enough space for the people in their faction to meet and have breakfast, that sort of thing. Nowadays, you don't have that, so you have to rent a room in a hotel, or you have to gather some other place. It's not quiet. It's not cloak and dagger, but it is a little bit more difficult to gather. But I think you know humans like to get together. They like to form bonds, and in politics, it is just a representative of that human need and that desire. But also, it means something because you vote, and when you vote, this is the highest body in Japan. These are the people that decide what happens with the economy, what happens with policy, what happens with the economy. Um, uh, you know, it's numbers mean something. So sometimes you swallow hard because you don't like things, but to keep the numbers together, you do a lot of things that you might not normally do. So I think
Right.
yes, yeah,
Okay, thank you for that. And then just to expand a little bit about on this question, we always talk about the factions in the LDP, and we know that there is history there. So those factions exist because they were first separate political parties, and then
from the beginning, right?
the beginning, yes. Now they exist under the umbrella of the LDP, so it's basically the same party. My question, next question to you is: we never talk about any factions, for example, in CDP, the Constitutional Democratic Party, and we don't talk about any factions in Ishin or Komeito or whatever. Is it because, well, there is no history there of, similar to that of the LDP factions, or is it because the parties are smaller, or what's the reason for that?
I forget what the joke is, but it's something like this: if you put five Japanese in a room, 20 minutes later there'll be six different groups, or there'll be seven different groups.
Okay.
And I think it probably applies to some other different nationality. that just forms these groups, and it has an
Mhm.
affinity for that. But I think, yeah, forming a group is something that you do even in high school. You remember the cliques, the various cliques that you have. So in the Constitutional Democratic Party, wow, that is an amalgamation of several opposition parties over a period of about 7 years that they have coalesced, and they have some heavy hitters there. They have a former prime minister there. They have Mr. Ozawa there. Mr. Ozawa is, one of the
Mm.
geniuses of Japanese politics. He's there. He's still very active. You've got Mr. Edano, who is going to contend for the presidency again. He used to be the leader. He was beat out by Mr. Izumi, and so Mr. Izumi wants to succeed himself. He's young, good looking. He's by most accounts done a pretty good job, but everybody wants to be on top, and so there are cliques and there are factions, but they're not called factions, but they're
Right.
basically personality groups that exist even in the Communist Party. There's going to be people that you you ascribe to the same political party, but you hate this guy because he didn't he didn't acknowledge your bow, or he didn't send you flowers on your birthday, or whatever. We live in Japan, and the slightest insult, the slightest thing can inflame somebody. You don't even know that you did it until weeks later, and somebody says, you should have done it this way rather than that way. So it happens all the time.
Okay, so yeah, I asked you because, well, we don't really dive into that too often.
Yeah.
But thank you very much for the clarification. So now I'll move to the different platforms and read the questions that are on them. I will go in chronological order. So to everybody who posted a question, please be patient. Okay.
Okay.
So yes. So first we go with yes, Hiroko-san, who wrote on LinkedIn a comment and then a question. The combined GDP of the G7 countries used to be 70% of the world total, the global GDP. Now it is 40%. And I think that their influence is declining. Given this situation, do you think it is necessary to review uh, Japan's G7 membership? Hiroko-san, I think this is what you mean by this question. If I have misunderstood you, please continue writing. Yes, Timothy, you're
Okay. For to the degree that I understand the question, G7, I think Japan strove for a long time to be a part of that. The third largest economy in the world, it deserves to be there. Um, but there's a lot of other things going on in the background too. It's not just that Japan is number three in the nation or in the world in terms of economic prowess, but it's
Mhm.
going to fall to number 10 within the next 4 years. There are other countries that are coming up really quickly. Their economy is building. You've got the BRICS, who are really being supported because of their economies. And I think just the overall population defines what your GDP is going to be. And Japan's population, South Korea's population is declining. So as a consequence of that, your GDP will also decline because of the calculation there. But BRICS, their populations are increasing. And then you've got what's going on with China and the Belt and Road and the amount of money. I mean,
Mhm.
China has a tremendous amount of money to spread around to achieve its geopolitical goals, and it causes a lot of consternation with the G7 and the Western countries, pretty much um, not dictated by, but pretty much
Mhm.
guided by what the United States is trying to do. And the United States also has its own economic issues. So I think yes, the G7 is here to stay. Japan is going to continue to be a contributing member, and that was one of the hallmarks of the Kishida administration. He wanted to utilize the fact that he was the longest serving foreign minister in Japanese post war history to to establish Japan as the geopolitical kind of decider and rule maker, and people would come to him or come to Japan to not to decide things, but to be as a kind of a peacemaker. He tried that in the Middle East, not very successfully, but I think that's a role that I think Japan saw itself as serving. We have a peaceful constitution. We're not exporting offensive weapons. Whether there's a war or conflict, maybe Japan can fill a valuable role there. And I think that's was driving the prime minister until just very recently. We're starting to get into this military industrial complex, and then his announcement, let's revise the constitution, maybe 2 weeks ago, in an
Mhm.
attempt to support the Abe faction so that he could remain as prime minister. I think that failed. I think his discussion with Mr. Aso also was not a strong enough endorsement, and he just said, I can't do it. So, but we have seen, a lot of ups and downs with his administration, and the fact that he is resigning also is a sign of the times. So yes, G7's here to say, and I think Japan, who the next leader will be, will carry on that tradition of attempting to be, the peacemaker and the person that people would come to define, because they're so neutral and they're so balanced and they're always fair. I think that moniker fits well on into Japan.
Yeah, and I think that there is a lot of hope within the general population here that Japan will preserve this role in the region and not go into the militarization direction.
Okay,
Well,
so very definitely, I'm sorry, just to interrupt you a second. Very definitely, who the contenders are for prime minister, will be talking about the revision of the Constitution.
right.
The end of the war, which was just this last week, triggered 5 members of the cabinet to visit Yasukuni publicly. And most people refrain from doing that, or they might send a surrogate. But this is pretty big. 5 of them, including Mr. Kobayashi, including Mr. Koizumi, visited uh, Yasukuni. This generally creates controversy within the Japan's neighbors. I personally think it's something that it's appropriate. It should be done. The
Yeah.
honoring the dead of from the past and the soldiers. Um, but it does give you a little bit of an indication. Takaichi also visited, and these are important indicators. So one of the things that will be talked about as a campaign stump speech is, I'm going to revise the Constitution, or we're going to put Japan on a firmer a foothold, or we're going to do something with the yen, or with the economy, or with the Bank of Japan. So it's all up for grabs right now. Don't mean to overemphasize that, but that's really the key phrase going forward.
No, but thank you for that because it is important, and we don't. Well, if you don't follow the Japanese press or the news on TV, then some of those events actually are not so obvious, right?
They're not
To
they're not obvious, and I think people don't appreciate the impact of what it means. You like Takaichi. She does this from time to time. She will visit Yasukuni. She is a staunch supporter of
see.
that end of the LDP, the more conservative end. And these kinds of statements, these kinds of tea leaves that you read, they do carry tremendous impacts. And not everybody catches it, and it's not always reported in the press, but it is something to keep your eye on.
Right. Okay, thank you for that. And I move now to YouTube to Jacob Pulis, his
Hi,
comment.
Jacob.
So, hello, Jacob, and thank you very much for watching us. And so he says, you tend to emphasize the personal relationships of politicians. When the faction system existed, were those focused factions or were they about personal relationships? How did a PM choose a faction?
It's the other way around. It's not how did the PM choose a faction, it's how did the faction choose the PM. So typically, to become prime minister, you have to be the leader of the faction. Those are the contenders. That used to be the story. So the faction, you have a certain number of people that will vote for you, because if they don't vote for you, you're gonna punish them. So it's about coalescing different factions so that you can become prime minister. And I think I know lots of politicians. I've known them for many years, and I think it's accurate to say that every person who becomes a member of parliament, their burning desire is to become prime minister. That is what they want to do. They want to lead the country. So whether they are very open about that, it is a desire that they all aspire to. So with the factions, how the factions are formed. Yes, it's mostly personality. And in terms of policy, as you're a politician and you come up in the ranks, there are certain areas of specialization that you uh, become known for. So it might be the economy, it might be industry, it might be high tech. It's something that you've kind of expressed some sort of familiarity with. So as you become a more and more prominent and more a senior member of the uh, of politics, you get committee seats, and you might have a junior committee seat, or you might have a chair seat, and those policies, as a chairman, or maybe even as a minister, now you've got this breadth of people who come to you, they they groom you, they tell you how great you are, you do favors for them. So those policies, when you become prime minister, are the ones that you've already got depth in. And so you will pronounce that this is what I'm going to do with the yen because I've got great experience there. And there are a lot of people like that. Mr. Motegi has his area of expertise. Mr. Kono has his. Sanai Takaichi has hers. So they will be promoting that. And so that's where kind of the policy priorities will go. But like I said earlier, the policies will basically stay the same because it's defined and decided by the various bureaucrats in the ministries, and you can't ignore them, but you
Mhm.
can prioritize different things. So I hope that's somewhat descriptive and satisfies the question. If not, please let us know.
Oh, yes. So it seems that the PM actually was meant to be MP, Member of Parliament. So,
Oh, okay.
so
Okay.
how do members of Parliament choose the faction they join?
Oh, okay. So that's another 20 minutes. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay.
Sorry.
Track,
Um,
stay on, Timothy. Yes.
yes. Rocking the boat. Um, a member of parliament, right?
Yes. So they
So
choose.
assuming I want to become a member of parliament, I have a job. I'm doing
Mhm.
something. I'm working in the bureaucracy. I'm working in a law firm. I'm working in my dad's company, whatever. And you thinking maybe you might want to be a politician. You go to these briefings. Maybe you have a YouTube channel. You talk about policies and stuff like that. And you think it might be a good idea. In that journey that you've had, you're rubbing shoulders with members of parliament, just like I do. I go to briefing breakfast, and you schmooze with people, and you support them, and you contribute to their causes. And it could be that a conversation comes up either initiated by you or initiated by one of these diet members. You know, we don't have anybody in your particular election district, or we have somebody that we really don't like who is in the other party. And somebody like you, if we supported you, would you run in that election district? Or on the other hand, I might say, look, I would like to become a member. I'd like to run for member of parliament. I have the money. I don't need to rely on you to support me, but I would like to run. Can you point me in the right direction? So they might say, in this particular district, you would look good. Your father looked good. You have some money. You can do that. Or they might say, you wrote a book and you have a countrywide appeal. So we're going to put you in the national election and you run there and we will support you and we will groom you and we'll show you how to talk and how to be effective on TV, that sort of thing. So that's how that happens. So it's a building process. And if your parents were politically active, the likelihood of you being politically active is enhanced. On the other hand, if you are a doctor, lawyer, or a industrialist, you're more likely to stay in that area because that's where you're comfortable. That's where you make your money. Getting into politics is a little bit dicey because you might lose. And in this economy, in this country, in this culture, if you're a loser, what are you going to do after that? If you've stepped out of the corporate uh, rat race to run for election, getting back in is very difficult. It's not like you can in many other countries you can have a second career, an attractive second career, because you made a mark for yourself in Japanese politics or in politics in general. So it's very dicey. It's very risky if you do it and lose, or if you do it and you win and then you lose. it's awful hard to get back up on your feet.
Okay, thank you for the clarifications. Now I move to Clubhouse. We have two questions there, and then I'll be back to LinkedIn. So the first one, a comment plus a question, is from Daniel Mags. Daniel, thank you very much for tuning in, for
Hi, Daniel.
listening. And yes. So Daniel writes, you mentioned that Japanese political parties have little influence on policy because that power sits with the ministers and with the ministries. Okay, that's the Kasumi
Yeah.
Kaseki. This is true. And see also the US Japan Joint Committee. So, is there anyone in the political system pushing for a more representative democracy?
So more representative, Daniel, I think what you're saying is that the member of parliament kind of guides what the ministry is going to be saying, not the other way around, I guess. Right?
I guess. I guess.
So
Yes. Yes.
assuming that's the question, Japan has gone through this kind of pendulum swing, and it's been 20 years in the making. But you might remember, Daniel, when we were first getting involved in Japan, when we were in college and following Japan and maybe studying Japanese on the side, that sort of thing. MITI, MITI, the Ministry of Industry and Trade, was the monster. It was defining Japanese trade policy, and Japan was the juggernaut, right? That age was jealously viewed by members of the parliament, and they tried to shift that power base to the members of the parliament. So we went through that phase, and that phase was rather successful. It lasted for about 10 or 15 years. This was during Mr. Ozawa's period, as he was trying to control and manage the LDP and make the LDP more powerful, and he was very successful at that. And one of the pet projects there was to make the prime minister's residence an actual force to be dealt with. You go to the United States, you've got the White House. You go to Japan, you've got the prime minister's residence, the brick building that was designed by Frank Lloyd Wright. You can't have much of a party there. So they designed this massive 5 floors underground, 5 floors above ground, this beautiful edifice, so that they could shift the power not only from the members of the parliament, but also to the chief cabinet secretary, to the prime minister, so that he can control things. And as a component of that, we have the digital agency. So we want to have all of the information unitized. Everybody has it, so that the guy that sits in the prime minister's office, he has his fingers everywhere. He can know what everybody's doing. Each of the various ministries, even now, they have their own internet system. They have their own email system. So that unitization there, this pendulum swing here is kind of reaching its climax here, where everything is being decided by the prime minister, the cabinet, and the cabinet secretary's office. So there's tremendous power that's there. But it's this swing that goes, and it could be coming back again. But yeah, it's a great question. The politicians want to have the power. They're jealous of the bureaucrats, and when they become minister of state, there are some. You've seen it yourself. Well, I don't know how a computer works. I'm the minister of technology. I don't know how to, but I have people that do that, right? You've got those kinds of people, and they get really lambasted by the bureaucracy or the bureaucrats who are briefing them and telling them what to say, and they get so angry with them that they didn't say it the right way, they didn't do it the right way. So there's this tension between the bureaucrats and the members of the parliament, and who gets selected is the prime minister's prerogative. So you might have the wrong guy in the wrong position, but he's a member of the parliament, he's a member of the cabinet, and you have to deal with it as best you can. I don't know if that really answers the question, Daniel, but it's a pretty deep one, and I hope I've touched on some of the essential elements of it.
Right. Thanks a lot for this, Timothy. Moving on, then Ryan Banjie in Clubhouse once again. Would you say that the instability of Japan's politics will keep some members of parliament who nonetheless hope to be PM one day from running in this election?
Say that again?
Okay. Would you say that the instability of Japan's politics will keep some members of parliament who hope to be a prime minister one day? Will that instability keep these people
Yeah.
from running in this election?
great question. Who's that from?
From
Ryan?
Ryan.
Thank
Yes.
you, Ryan. That's a great question. And let's focus on Mr. Koizumi as an example of why that question is so great. So his dad already said, I don't want my son to run in this election because number one, it's going to be a bloodbath. Number two, and if dad says this and you need to pay attention, number two, this next presidency and this next premiership is going to be short-lived. So stay out of the way. Even if you're in the cabinet, it's better just to kind of demur, keep your powder dry because it'll be the election after that. So, and I pretty much ascribe to this too. The next election for the LDP, I don't care how much money they give in a new economic stimulus package or how handsome the new prime minister is going to be, they're going to get a whipping. And it could be that they really need to bring in another party, another group, another ally to maintain 50% of the lower house or 50% of the upper house. It's really up to the lower house because that's the election that will really critically change things. So yeah, it's a great observation that some people will just step out because this is not the time. This isn't the time for me. It's going to be a bloodbath. I don't want to get into a fist fight with Mr. Motegi because he's going to be here for a while.
Okay. Thank you, Ryan. I hope this answers your question. Now, let's move on to LinkedIn, and there we have Yuka with a couple of questions actually. So she says, I echo Mr. Kishida's comments that the LDP is in the need for younger leadership. Could you compare and contrast Shinjiro Koizumi and Takayuki Kobayashi in this context?
Yeah.
Koizumi Jr., of course, has a strong pedigree as a second generation politician. However, he has made some controversial comments, such as referring to environmental issues as sexy. On the other hand, Mr. Kobayashi is considered an elite politician with a distinguished background. What would his campaign slogan be? What are your thoughts on this, Timothy?
Okay, so that kind of dichotomy between Kobayashi and
Mhm. Yes,
Koizumi is pretty interesting. So Kobayashi, I think he went to Harvard, and then he became a bureaucrat. And so he, from the bureaucrat, we had the question earlier: how do you become a member of parliament? He
right.
distinguished himself. He ran for election. He's 49 now. He's been elected 4 times. So that means probably in 12 years, he became a member of parliament when he was in his mid 30s. And he was also picked as a minister of state for economic security. I think the first minister of state for economic security. That position is now held by Takaichi. But the Harvard, and if it wasn't Harvard, forgive me, but it was a U.S. Advanced degree, probably in government, like Mr.
Mhm.
Hayashi's. Um, then back to the bureaucracy, he was probably seconded and sent to the United States to study as a bureaucrat, and then came back and assumed his position, decided to run. And so you can kind of see where he's going with that. He's going to be pretty much up the straight and narrow. He's going to have a strong economic and security portfolio.
Mhm.
Koizumi, on the other side, his dad was famous, the Elvis hair. His dad was just fantastic. And he comes from that kind of pedigree. He didn't serve in the bureaucracy. His dad, he was a diet secretary, and he married a beautiful actress, right? So there's glamour there. There's flair. It's a different kind of candidacy, and they would run differently. So it depends on what do you want. Do you want it's kind of like, do you want Kamala Harris with feel good about everything and a joyous campaign, or do you want Donald Trump where you've got details and specifics and this is what I'm going to do? It's kind of like that. I think Koizumi would run a strong race, and I think the women and I think the young people would vote for him overall. I think Mr. Kobayashi would finish very strong. He would get the technical and the business vote. It would be a hard toss up, but I think yeah, it'd be a hard toss up. I can't say one way or the other. A tempting thing to gamble on, but I'm not ready to do that right now. But thanks for the the invitation.
No, Yuka, thank you for the great questions. And keep watching. Okay, keep watching us because we'll be talking about this. We'll see what happens in September. And of course, there will be analysis there as well. Next,
And also, and also the questions that we get, we identify the questions when we produce the synopsis, Maya, because it guides us into how what people are interested in, what we should
yes,
focus on in the next briefing. So we pay attention to your questions, and they're really important to us. So keep them coming. Thank you.
yes, thank you. Once again, we're on LinkedIn with Mr. Akira Takuhiro. So, we have a question from him. The question is, although who the Japan Prime Minister may, who, okay, sorry, let me go through it from the beginning. I may need, to alter a little bit. Okay, so um, it may matter who the Japanese Prime Minister is, but aren't the issues and challenges larger than this? The issues that Japan faces aren't the challenges larger than this. That is, the likely turmoil generated by the US will swamp
Yes.
any uncertainties in Japan. In other words, Japan will not be able to defend itself by the end of 2024. Your thoughts on this, Timothy?
That's a really great question, and it's a very deep question. So, kind of the fact of the matter is, and this underpins the question, who cares about the musical chairs that's going on now geopolitically and internationally on in terms of economy and what's going on with China. Japan just doesn't stand a chance. It needs to rely on its allies, and in particular, it really depends on the United States. So what the United States says or suggests or coughs, Japan really needs to pay attention to. And so that's why Mr. Abe flew to meet with Mr. Trump. He was the first leader to meet Mr. Trump. That's why Mr. Kishida went to Camp David and tried to form this relationship with President Biden. Not altogether unsuccessfully, but I think maybe he's just a little bit wooden in terms of that kind of development of. But he's got the whole foreign ministry that's helping him develop that smile and develop that what your overture is going to be and what gift you're going to bring and what you're going to talk about. But yeah, yeah. I think all things being equal, and they never are, Japan is really at the whim of a lot of other forces that it really can't control. So it needs to be in a position to defend itself, to make the right call when that call comes in, and to have the right individual in that position of power.
Well, yes. Okay, thank you. Moving on to the next, yes, YouTube. We've got Surya, Bumantera Surya. Thank you for joining us again this week. We appreciate that and your questions as well. So, Timothy, do you think
Yes.
Japan-South Korea relations can get better considering there are still very strong anti-Japanese sentiments in Korea among conservatives due to the Japanese colonial era in the past?
Yeah. Yeah. I hate that question. Um,
So,
you wish that Japan and Korea could be better friends, but it is really fraught with a lot of controversy, a lot of hatred, deep-seated hatred, and even the relationships between Japan and Australia are still somewhat frayed 79 years afterwards because of what Japan and Australia and the Bataan Death March and all of the things that happened with the Australian soldiers. The Australians are not forgetting that, and that pales in comparison to what happened with Korea. So yeah, it's hard and it's just unfortunate. You know, the shining light here is what happened with the United States. The greatest generation. What did they do after the defeat of Japan? And how were they able to succeed there? In human history, it's never happened. And it has allowed people like you and me, Maya, and all of the people who are tuned in now to specialize on this unbelievable relationship that's really propelled peace and prosperity. It could have gone a completely different way.
yes.
So Japan is striving to repair that, with a lot of different initiatives. It's too bad that Mr. Yoon doesn't have the complete power to guide the legislature there, so that he can make things. But the opposition is virulently anti-Japanese, and so it's hard for that relationship to really flourish. And there's a lot of trade, there's a lot of tourism that goes back and forth, but at the policy level, and I think at the political level, the the general population, the people who vote, still harbor this. I mean, they still suffer from what happened, and it wasn't just 79 years ago. I mean, the colonization of Korea went on for 30 years before, even before Pearl Harbor. So yeah, there's a lot of bitterness there. I wish I could be more hopeful about it, but yeah, I think it's just one of those things.
Right. Okay. So LinkedIn, back to LinkedIn with Shinjin Wolf. Thank you very much, Shinjin, for watching us, tuning in on this Sunday morning. The question: in your opinion, how might the election of a new leader influence Japan's defense strategy and its relationship with the United States? Are there specific candidates whose victory could lead to significant shifts? So I think that you partially answered this question earlier, Timothy. If you have anything to add to it, just please go
No,
on.
it's a great question, and undoubtedly, the defense intelligence um, environment, and also the um, defense industry within Japan is on a steep climb up. It's unmistakable there. We went from 1% of GDP to 2% of GDP. We're still in that 5 year period where we're going to go from 1% to 2%. And there is a heavy reliance on the United States for material, and also for protection and for armaments, for storage, that sort of thing. But in the meantime, the Japanese are saying, we don't want to import all of this. We want to develop it ourselves and actually embed it with a little bit more technology than, I mean, armaments are expensive, and they're very fragile. I mean, you use them and they're gone, or you ship them away and they're used, and so they're destroyed. So it's an industry that Japan could excel in. And Mr. Ishiba, as you know, he was defense minister briefly. So I think if he becomes prime minister and he's got a good shot at it, I think you will see him shining his chops. Right? He's good at this. He's done it before. So I think you'll see an enhancement there. There are some people who are contenders for the prime minister who are more dovish. Mr. Kishida was dovish, but even in light of the fact that he was a dove, he was coming from Hiroshima, he was prime minister. Even in light of that, he made some decisions that were contrary to what you might have supposed from somebody with a pacifist background and a pacifist bent. So it's really difficult to say, but a good question. And I think, yes, defense and the economy with the defense industry aspects continuing here in Japan. I think no matter who is the new prime minister, it will continue in that vein.
Well, maybe the reason for that is also that a lot of the policies are still carried on and created by the ministries, right? And regardless of who is in power, basically those policies they continue to be developed and to be implemented by the ministries.
Sure.
So
I
at
mean,
least,
take a look at the armaments and the machinery and the technology that's required there. I mean, just for example, the fighter jets, the advanced fighter jets between Japan, Italy, and England. I mean, that's a 12, 15 year window before even the airplanes roll off the tarmac.
mhm,
So yeah, it's a long time coming, even with armaments, drones, submarines, that sort of thing. Hard to stop
right.
it midstream.
Yes, but it also makes Japan a kind of easy to work with because you don't have to worry that with the change of the prime minister there will be a sharp change in
Right.
direction, right?
That's
So
true. That's like the question we just received earlier. Does it really make any difference?
right,
Yeah.
yes. Okay, and I continue with another question from Shinjin Wolf, I believe. So, how could the leadership change affect Japan's economic growth trajectory, particularly in terms of innovation and technological development? Are there concerns or opportunities that businesses should be aware of? Yes, I love this question. Thank
Who's,
you.
who's this from?
I think this is from Shinjin again.
This diabolical question came from Shinjin.
Yes.
Thanks a lot, pal. So yeah, depending on who the prime minister is, I think that's what you're asking. Depending on the prime minister, what kind of economic policies, what kind of changes might there be that boost us back up? And there are a couple of people like Konotara and also Motegi who mentioned specifically about the economy, about the yen, about inflation. So if you have somebody that's strongly economically bent, they might concede in other areas of the economy to boost another area of the economy. So, for example, when the yen is very high, it's very cheap, Japanese products sell very well, but the amount of revenue that's generated is not so great. On the other hand, when it's low, Japanese goods become expensive, and so there are winners and losers, right? So it depends on what your economic model is. If you are a Keidan Ren guy, you want the Japanese corporates to do extremely well, and the economy is based on an export model. So you want to keep that portion of your constituency happy, then other people are going to suffer. On the other hand, if you're more um, concerned about the cost of living and people having a job and having a roof over the head and the kids are cool and the suicide rate has fallen, you're going to be bent in a different way, but somebody's going to pay that price. So it really depends. Are you a corporate guy? Are you more of a um, I don't want to say socialist? Are you more attuned to the less conservative side of the spectrum?
Right. I would like to add something here. So, Shinjin, you asked about how could businesses and startups probably and newcomers and also people who live here and work here know about these opportunities. And one of the outlets I would recommend you follow is the briefings, the policy briefings that Timothy's company actually does every month. So with those policy briefings, Timothy actually delivers them, and he talks about the change and alterations and shifts in policy, and these policies usually are about the new technologies that are just coming up now. So like healthcare, like batteries, like energy storage and everything, And if you watch those briefings, inevitably you will learn about opportunities that exist out there because of policy shifts.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to know more, you can always contact Langley Esquire there, and ask, could you just talk with me and see, and we look for opportunities and so on, because this is one of the companies, one of the very very few companies actually who keeps watching the policy changes and looking for opportunities for
Yep.
companies, be them global or startups, that want to come to Japan or want to develop their businesses here in Japan. So I hope that this is also another part, of the answer to your question. So yes, Timothy.
Thank you very much for that plug. And also, I think while we're plugging uh, the program, we need to tell people before the election of prime minister, we're also going to have a special briefing, maybe 5 days before the election. Tim Langley, Dan Harada talking for about 20 minutes on who the candidates are, what it means, what's the prognosis, what does it look like 5 days before the election. And then similarly, Maya, 5 days after the election, we're going to go on LinkedIn or YouTube? I forget how you're managing that.
LinkedIn, yes, on LinkedIn as well. Yes,
So
right.
could
So
you
watch
share
out
that,
for.
please?
Yes. Well, basically, once again, these briefings will be broadcast at 12 o'clock noon. So watch
On a
out.
work
They
day.
on
On
a
a work
work
day.
day,
Yeah.
Tuesday, the Tuesday before the election and the Tuesday after the election. So watch out for them. And if you want to hear, the banter between Dan Harada and Timothy Langley, and learn something about,
Yeah.
yes, the behind the scenes dynamics in the LDP. So stay tuned, and we'll announce them on LinkedIn and YouTube again.
It's
Yes.
it's a lot of heavy lifting
Mhm.
for me, for Langley Esquire, for Dan Harada. But we evaluate it as critical for the audience to know what's happening, what's going on in real time. So several days before the election and then several days after the election. So if you like that sort of thing, hit like, Pet Maya's cat. Tell people about our show so that we continue to expand people's
Yes.
understanding and appreciation for what's going on here.
Yes, definitely. Tell your friends, your colleagues about the show. It is open, it is free of charge. And if I can say, it is a byproduct, of what everybody here is doing. And as a byproduct, we appreciate, this opportunity to actually help you
Yeah.
make sense of what is happening here in Japan. All right, and continuing with a couple of more questions, Timothy. Hiroko-san, thank you very much for, yes, for clarifying. Please let us address that question next week. Okay, and just let me move on with another one. Once again from Jacob. In America, the Democrats are a big tent party. So there are policy differences between Joe Manchin and Bernie Sanders. The LDP is a bigger tent yet, and then has is a bigger. Okay, sorry. The LDP is a bigger tent, yet has few policy differences within it. Why is this difference? So, within the Democratic Party in the United States, there are huge policy differences between different, groups and factions, and the LDP, these differences are very few. What's the reason for this?
Okay, it's not quite accurate that there are few. Within the LDP, yes, it's pretty much plain vanilla. You might have an emphasis on one policy rather than the other, but it is a conservative party in essence. But it's not just the LDP. You also have the Komeito party, which is an alliance party with the LDP. So the LDP, big business, conservative policies, sometimes hard conservative, sometimes soft conservative, sometimes like with Mr. Kishida and some of the members of the cabinet, very soft policies. But then you've got Komeito, and they must accommodate the wishes of Komeito. And Komeito it's not a socialist party, but it is on the softer side, very soft side of conservatism, and dealing with women, children, the downtrodden, the welfare of citizenry. And so the LDP does need to modify its positions to accommodate its alliance partner, Komeito. So there is another color there that I think some people forget. Komeito doesn't wag the dog. It is part of the tail. It has a small um, uh, contingent that helps the LDP have a majority in the lower house and a supermajority in the upper house. But that's a very delicate balance. So yeah, it's and as a consequence of that, Komeito does get a cabinet seat, and so that they can manage and control. And the LDP is not in a good position to ignore their wishes, and they get things done. So the big tent comparison between the LDP and what's going on in the Democratic Party, and I'm sorry, I'm not a specialist in what's going on in the United States, even though I'm an American. I'm more familiar with what's going on here. I really can't comment that richly about that distinction.
Right. Okay, but thank you for sharing your thoughts on that. And one more question. This will be the last one for today because I can see that somebody is actually poking you and telling you that you have to move on. Okay, so the last question for today is, well, from Tommy Two Bats. And he says, you mentioned that individuals pick up experience and expertise in various areas, but what about ideology? Is that assumed when joining the party? Is it questioned, or liable to change?
Who is this question from?
Tommy Two Bats.
Tommy Two Bats. What a great
Yes.
question. So, Tommy, take a look at Japan's view towards religion, right? So there are Catholics in Japan, but there are Buddhists and there are Shintoists. There's lots of different religions here, but overall, I think you can say that the Japanese are, generally speaking, ambivalent about religion. And similarly, they're somewhat ambivalent about ideology. So the ideology that you typically have, you got maybe from your parents or maybe in college, not so much in high school, but if you go to college, it's the people you hang out with, it's maybe the things that you study that you're influenced by. In terms of of really hardcore ideology. The Japan Communist Party is top of the pile. They are very strong. They are committed. They have the Akahata, the newspaper that generates funds for them to run their policy. They're clean. They're very uh, at the high education level. They're very astute. So their ideology within the people who are members of the Japanese Communist Party is very strong. It's very unitary. You have a little bit of variation, but with the LDP, you've got it. It's a mix-up of several factions, basically based on personality cults. That's a little bit of an overstatement, but it can be said that. So it's
Mhm.
not so much about the policy. He's my boss, and he likes to be woke. So I guess I like to be woke too because he's my boss. So it's more geared toward staying cohesive. You're a part of the team. Do what the team does. Swallow hard and just bear through it because the group dynamic is far more important than what I feel on a policy issue. And I think that's maybe a bit of an overstatement, but I think it's pretty accurate when defining how people feel ideologically and how they might
Mm.
join a party or a faction. I think it's somewhat in the background. It's there, but it's in the background.
Yeah, and once again, then I have to emphasize, my favorite topic. How Yes, you mentioned, Timothy, that the group what's that, interests, they
Dynamics,
all
yeah,
and dynamics are much more important than the individual's ideology.
yeah.
So, and it happens everywhere,
You see that
every
inside the companies, sure.
yeah,
You see that
inside
every
the
day.
companies as well here. So this is part of the Japanese culture, and it has been formed and nurtured through centuries. So you cannot change that mindset in politics just because one individual has this idea or that idea. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's something that I think that quite a few Japan fans feel and have witnessed here. Great, Timothy. So with this, yes, I can see how triumphant you are. That we have come to the end of the questions for today, but we have a couple of questions that I will carry over to the next Sunday. So yes, Hiroku-san, thank you very much for being patient with me. I appreciate that. And to everybody who joined us today, thank you so very much indeed for being here, for listening to us, and allowing us to, inform you. Because once again, this is important for people who live in Japan and who do business in Japan, because there are opportunities that seem like challenges, but if you're informed about them in advance, you are in a good position to actually benefit from them. And Timothy, thank you as well,
Thank you very
because
much, Maya. Thanks, everybody.
yes. And before we close up for today, I would like to say once again thank you to our sponsors, Kanachu.com and James Howell and Houze Inc. With Hana Urushizawa Howell. Thank you both for being our sponsors and for allowing us to represent you here on LinkedIn and also on YouTube, Facebook, and Clubhouse. That's all for today. We'll be here once again on Wednesday morning at 8 o'clock and next Sunday at 8:20. So join us again. Have a great Sunday.
Thank you, Maya. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Woohoo!
Woohoo!
Strangle cat time.
No, not at all. My cat has been really, really happy this Sunday morning. Okay, give me a sec.
Click, click, click.
Exactly.